Paul, how are you, brother?
All right. Good. How's yourself?
Yes, wonderful, mate. I mean, we're here to talk about certainly one of the subjects I'm fascinated in, and I'm a little bit involved myself, and certainly not to the extent that you are, but it's everything blades, isn't it? Everything sword making, knife making,
Yeah.
armaments in general.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting world. Everyone likes shiny things.
Yes. I'll just tell you my story very briefly, but I went to a bushcraft weekend about 15 years ago with a mate, and we camped the weekend and went to all kind of lectures while we were there. And one of the chap was a forger, but a forger in the sense of being a blacksmith.
Yeah.
And he not only knocked up his own blades, but obviously did all the handles and everything. And he had a load of parts you could buy. So I bought some deer antler and some of these kind of I don't know what you call them, but like prefabricated discs that you can use for making handles and stuff.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted to make a knife, and it took me 15 years to actually make it, but there it is.
Yeah, good job, mate. Good job.
Yeah, that's it's actually got my name and my bear claw logo etched on the blade, but it's come off when I sanded it. So you can, friends at home, you can just about make out the logo there.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, nice one.
Yeah, and I managed to find something that looks slightly bear clawish on eBay. But yeah, I'm a great believer in, follow your dreams, make them come true, even if it did take me 15 years. I will say that doesn't look much, but that's about probably £3,500 worth of equipment all in just to make that knife. Countless hours of work. Someone said to me, "Bloody hell, Chris, that's good." And I said, "Well, it's not my skill. It's just that if you don't get it to a certain level of good, you have to throw it away
Sure.
and do it again." So it doesn't take for anyone out there, to get started in this. You don't have to be, I don't know, some medieval Japanese sword maker or something. But so that's my story. Over to you, mate. How did you get involved?
Really, just as you said at the start, it was following my own dreams and passions, really. I came to Edinburgh in '92 for university originally, realised quite shortly in that I wasn't going to do that course for the rest of my life, and I'd found something much more engaging along the way, and that was fencing originally. Sport fencing, that's all there was at that time, but I just had a real natural fascination, a kind of magnetism, if you like, towards the blades and towards the steel. At that time, I found a couple of knife and Dirk and Ski and Do, the traditional Scottish knife makers on Edinburgh's Royal Mile. They took us in, teaching us, various skills, and one of them offered me full-time work, finishing uni a couple of years later. So that got me on that path. And I've followed it ever since, starting up my own armories in '98, and very much working with the parallel path of the martial side of it as well, in studying traditional swordsmanship and European martial arts, and teaching that along the way as well.
Incredible. I was fortunate to go to a couple of museums in Tokyo. One of them was the history of sword making, and it was sort of set out at, let's just say, 12 stanchions.
Yeah.
And the first one showed the raw ore coming out the rock. The second showed where the swordsman, the craftsman would melt it down. The third showed where he'd weld it onto the end of a rod. And all that friends who've seen YouTube videos out there will know will know that the process hasn't really changed, but the technology has. And then finally folding this blade, just hammering it flat, then folding it over and hammering it, which allegedly, if you believe the film Highlander, they can do 1,000 times. I'm not sure if that's the truth. But and then to go to the, I think it was the National Museum, and see the actual katanas there, in all their glory. So the original samurai swords, all preserved, lots of handles, lots of what's the protective bit called? The
suba.
That bit there, yeah.
Guard.
What I'd call a handguard, but and I just love it, mate. You know, I love the whole ancestry. In fact, I'm going to tell you one more anecdote. Bear with me, folks. We are going to let Paul speak, but I was at a party once with a uni mate where I think we just graduated, and we were all a bit worse for wear at this party. And he went, "Chris, look at this." He reached under the sofa and he pulled out a Japanese sword, and it was his great grandfather's, had been handed it by a prisoner of war in Burma. And I didn't realize a lot of these Japanese officers were of samurai lineage. So this sword would have been handed down, you know, over centuries. And what they would do when they joined the army is they would just change the handle part to have it sort of, you know, military standard, so to speak. And all it had on it was the scabbard was snapped in half. I remember thinking at the time, God, should I offer him, like, you know, $1,000 for it or it'd just been my dream to own one. And I didn't. And I met up with him recently and I said, "You haven't still got that sword, mate, by any chance, have you?" He went, "Nah, mate, sold that 50 quid.
No. Oh, no. Good Lord. Oh, wow.
So, sorry, we diverge. We go off track, but yes, incredible. So how did your career develop? What sort of stuff did you start producing?
Well, before I started my own armories, I was really just making mild steel wall hangers for tourist market. You know, things that kind of looked like a sword from the other end of your room, but weren't very functional. And I think I had I just had natural fascination for the martial side and accuracy in reviving the martial arts. And to do that, the only right way you can do that is to have the right weight, the right balance tool in your hand. So, you know, the swords have to be right. So I was always interested in making something more historically accurate. And the only way I could realize that, I realized in the end, was to start my own armory, start my own business, and, you know, learn as I went, which I think with any craft, you're always learning, and every day is a school day. You know, you never stop learning that way. But I had to take that plunge, and started the armories in '98, specialising in historically accurate swords and knives. That was the focus to start with. I didn't have a main product at that time, but that certainly changed along the way as my interest grew and became a bit more focused as well. And it wasn't until 2008. Myself and a good friend who was involved with the Academy of Arms at that time decided to start a World War II based living history group, focusing on the original commando training from the Highland training centres, and the close combat was a focus of that. And it was quite evident that the FS fighting knife, the famous commando knife, was right at the heart of that too. So that led to a path of a quite intense focus on that knife, to remake it again, and as accurately and as closely as the original World War II examples. And that has now become very much a main product.
Is it fair to say, because I've handled one of these Sykes Fairburn, can we call them replicas? Is that what they're?
Fairburn Sykes, yeah,
recreations.
Yeah.
I got given one for a Royal Marines event that I organised, and the lads very kindly chipped in and they gave me the one that's in the frame. And
yeah,
took me about 3 years before I looked at it one day and thought, is that plastic? Right. And I started to, but anyway, I digress. But what I'm trying to say in it, it's the black dagger. It looks like it's formed from one piece of metal.
Yeah, it'll probably be something like this.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we call the third pattern FS knife. And that was the last pattern that was developed in World War II, and it's the only pattern really that's been produced in numbers since that time, since 1943.
Bringing that forward a bit, I think I mentioned this to you when we spoke. I did a charity speed march last year up at Achnacarry.
Oh yeah, the one, yeah.
We took, it was about 10 of us, elite veterans or elite forces veterans, and we recreated the original speed march, the original 9 miler, carrying all the gear in the 90 minutes, and the lads did really, really well, and we raised a lot of money for the Royal Marines charity. But someone, and I am going to do a bit of Googling, mate, to try to remember which company it was, but they very kindly donated a Sykes Fairburn replica, and it raised over £1,000 at least.
Mm-hmm.
And what the point I was coming back to, Paul, is to look at it. I'd say that they'd made it way better than it probably was back in the day.
Yeah. When you look at closely at the wartime originals, you do see, inconsistent grinds, the center lines of the blades being slightly off or squiggly, and grind marks down the blades, because it was wartime, and they were mass producing as efficient, handcrafting, but still mass producing as efficiently as they could, to keep up with the demand back then. So yeah, I've realised that along the way myself, and I've come to terms with, I don't have a problem in saying that. Yeah, the blades that I make are of a higher quality than the blades then, but it's all towards still paying tribute really to the original makers and to the original personnel that carried them too.
Yes, it's the ultimate tribute, isn't it? It's when you take something and you make it better.
Yeah.
And back in the day, then were they just sort of so friends at home? The original commandos, Second World War, when they went behind enemy lines, they were issued this dagger. And in essence, it was for stabbing the hell out of your enemy or taking out their windpipe or other such horrible ends. But it looked very basic, Paul, as you just shown. Is that any sort of form of carbon steel, or can that just be any old thing?
I mean, carbon steel hasn't really been improved on since the Iron Age, for good sword or knife blades. The form of the knife, everything about it was all designed very specifically as a fighting knife, not a knife fighting knife, but as a knife designed for silent killing, for basically entering the body and exiting, causing as much trauma on the way out as possible, and doing that job efficiently. It wasn't a can opener. It wasn't a bushcraft or a fieldcraft knife. Every knife in its own way is a specific tool for a specific job. And that means that every knife in its own way is a compromise as well, because it's not good for certain other jobs, So that's exactly what the FS knife was designed for. And the FS, of course, Fairbairn Sykes, is named after William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes, who were the two close combat instructors, the original instructors that first established the close combat syllabus, taught to the commandos and subsequent SF.
Yes. If they really knew commandos well, they'd have put a lanyard on it. There must be loads of those left in, occupied France or something.
Oh, they're absolutely. In fact, I have one that's down in the armory downstairs. It's framed up, and it was excavated in Sword Beach in 1968. A second pattern, and the blade and the guard are, extremely corroded, but the brass grip is very much intact, and so that's proudly framed up along with an image of 4 Commando going forward on the beach that day.
Do you have any more there, Paul, to show us?
Yeah, I certainly do. I've got a brief history of the FS knife.
Please. I think
right beside
friends at home would love to hear it.
Yeah, no problem. Well, the story of the FS knife starts where Fairbairn and Sykes first were before the Second World War, and that was Shanghai. They were officers in the Shanghai Municipal Police, and this was exactly the type of knife they developed for the police at that time. So this is now known as what you call a first pattern Shanghai knife. And you can see similarities to the FS knife. It's got what you call the Coke bottle shaped grip. It's a bit shorter overall though, but it's got this tapering diamond section double-edged blade and straight guards. So, the similarities are there. But obviously the police are not using this for silent killing. That's kind of frowned upon. But it was basically a self-defense knife for the officers. It was getting yourself out of a clinch if you got 1 or 2 lads on you already and pinning an arm or 2 against your body. And they accessed it by carrying it in a scabbard like this, upside down, rigged to their shoulder harness inside the jacket. So all you need to do is put a hand inside your jacket and access your knife and cut your way out of clinch to overcome a situation. And that was the very first origins of it. They then moved to brass grips for a bit more efficient production. Again, the brass grip formed the basis of the FS knife production when it came to that.
How do you get the gnarling on that handle?
Brass grips are turned and knurled. This is a second pattern FS knife. This is one of my own, and this is done by machine. The original grips were cast, and they were cast so that they could have a rectangular recess for the tang of the blade to continue up in. And then they were turned to smoothen the surface, and then they were knurled by machine. And you have to follow the contours of the machine by hand as well. But, this is a little bit different to the third pattern you might be used to, but this is the iconic first pattern FS knife right here. So these were only produced in a very small number. This is an original piece made by Wilkinson Sword Company, and these were made from about January 41 to August 41 only, and only by Wilkinson Sword. And after that time, they moved to the second pattern until October 43, when all production moved to the third pattern. So by brief comparison, there's your first pattern. The first pattern has a very slight S-shaped crossguard to it, as well as this blunted area here, the ricasso. And the second pattern, in comparison, hopefully you can see the slight difference, is a straight guard, doesn't have a little curve on it, more or less the same type of grip, knurled and turned, but the edges of the blade went all the way to the guard this time. And the third pattern, similar to the second, same blade and guard really, but the only difference being the grips went to being cast in zinc alloy. And you can cast this concentric circle form. If you tried that with knurling, you would then have to, you would interrupt the knurling. It wouldn't work out so much. Fairbairn actually wasn't a big fan of the cast grip in the end. He said it could actually turn in the hand if it's wet, with water or blood or such, as opposed to the knurling, which tended to bite into the fingers a bit more. So it's got its own story and its own history, and I do like to pay tribute to that by using heritage materials and heritage wood especially. So this is Achnacari wood. This is spalted beech, and from one of the trees that formed part of the original rope work course at the CBTC, the Commando Basic Training Centre, which is where all the recruits went through for their training at Achnacarry between February 42 and the end of the war.
Wow. And are you aware of the top price one of these has fetched at, say, auction or similar?
Yeah, I donated one of the heritage knives to, I think it was the Royal Marine charity recently, and I think it fetched $2,000 at auction for them, so it did well at that.
Stupid question time. What's the fascination with these now? Why are they so beloved?
Yeah, they're still revered in a way amongst the forces communities, because I think, you know, it really symbolizes the nature of the job, you know, about going forward by stealth. When you get there, causing as much damage, devastation as you can, and extracting with, you know, fewer or minimum casualties. It's about that, the essence of who dares wins, if you like, you know, going forward with bravery to close with the enemy. And it takes balls, doesn't it? You know? And that knife has always, I think, symbolized that job.
Took balls because, you know, a lot of these young lads didn't come back, did they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Myself, and my mate Mike had mentioned we'd started the Second World War group in 2008, and we were very lucky at that time when we did start it that there were still enough World War II veterans travelling to Fort William and Spian Bridge every year for Remembrance Weekend events, that we could, you know, sit down with them and engage with them, and they were invariably happy to share the stories of their training and their experience in theatre as well. And it just incredible, these lads, you know, the stories they came out with. And, you know, a lot of folk will look at the knives today and not realize there'll be a disconnect between this nice, pretty, shiny thing and the job it was designed for. Because the job it's designed for is not a pretty one, you know, it's a messy one, quite literally. And yeah, you know, these lads were using these knives, you know, and they're still used today. In fact, you know, I think any form of theatre will always end up in some way in close combat. And when it comes to close combat, then only the ancient ways and the ancient tools still work. You know, that's never going to change. So there's always room for and a place for a good knife in any theatre that way.
Do you think the lads got to keep their knives, or do you think they had to hand them back in when they finished their service?
Yeah, a lot of them kept the knives. And a lot of families, I've been contacted by a lot of families that have their, you know, fathers or grandfathers' knives. So yeah, if they were in, they kept them.
Are you familiar with a chap? Just get his name up. Kyle Royer.
I'm not sure. No.
Oh wow! I just mention it because once you start knife making, suddenly your YouTube starts throwing up loads of knife making videos, and
sure.
This chap's in America, and I've never seen such exquisite knife make. I'm sure if I came to your workshop, Paul, but this guy works in his father's workshop over there in America, and the swords he produces and the knives are just beyond anything you can imagine, everything down to the last detail.
Yeah.
So I think he made one recently. Excelsior, was that a sword?
Excalibur.
Yeah, I think it was a sort of along those lines, Excalibur. Yeah. I think he called this one Excelsior, but
yeah,
it was. What's the name where they layer the steel in such a way that you get that incredible pattern down the blade?
Damascus or pattern welded.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
And friends at home, this might not sound a lot, but you have to set your when you fold the steel, you can layer it in a certain way that when you bash it and then you fold it and then you extricate, is that the word, when you make it go, when you bash it long? That you get this incredible pattern down the blade, like it's interwoven, and then all the rest of it was just made to exact perfection. I mean, there's no words for it. Carl Royer, folks, if you just have a Google of this chap, and finally he's laying gold, 24 karat gold, using a little chisel to chip out his name across the handguard, and then he's bashing gold into it, and he's even explaining this is a crap 24 karat gold. It's not, it's not working properly. And then when he machines it off or sands it off, it's just, it's like the Rolex equivalent of a, yes, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, there are a lot of top makers out there, and there's a lot of impressive skill still in the knife and sword making world. Makers are relatively few and far between, but yeah, there's a lot of top lads out there.
Well, it's great that it's a skill that's come back and it's being reborn, because obviously swords are they're not a big thing in not everyone. I mean, there was a time, wasn't there, when probably most fighting men, age men, had some sort of sword, or in Scotland the claymore. And
sure. I mean, to give you an idea of the demand, and this qualifies that this is not a shameless plug for my company.
Please do.
Because I stopped. I stopped taking orders a few years ago, because my demand, I basically have about 10 years worth of work lined up at the moment, and I think that's not unusual for high quality, makers. Is your demand, once your reputation starts to spread, word of mouth and so on, especially in military circles, where it spreads quick, your demand, is going up. And if you're only one pair of hands, that becomes harder to keep up with. I was telling folk that 5 years was the lead time for FS knives, and 10 years was about the lead time for custom work. And folk were still saying, that's fine, I don't mind waiting. So I made the decision, when does that end? I've got to cap that. So took that decision. And I think it's not unusual for high quality knife and sword makers that way to reach that point where the demand's going up and up, and you have to say, you know what, I'm going to cap things for the moment and play catch up for a number of years.
Yes, exactly. And also, Paul, I look at these guys and say they're making some sort of, bushcraft knife, and they're putting, I don't know, like at least 2 days effort into it, if not longer. And then when you look at the prices on the internet of these knives, they're pretty bloody low. I mean, you can get them from a tenner to, if you really were taking your bushcraft seriously, you could spend 400 or 500 quid.
Oh, quite easy, yeah.
But after you take out the machine time and the materials and all of that, there's very little profit in it for the knife maker.
Yeah. There's very few shortcuts really to making a good knife. Certainly by hand. If you're making everything by machine and it's all, laser cut, and you're using big kit to do it, there's big investment involved in getting all that kit in the first place. So, but if it's small scale production, there's very few shortcuts, to essentially making that right shape of blade, getting that heat treatment right, using the best quality steels you can, and, fit and finish of all the components, leather for the scabbard, and doing all that work again by hand. There's very few shortcuts to it, so it's heavy investment in the time that it takes to do it, and that has to be reflected in the cost somehow.
Yes. Talking of leather, that's my first effort there at a sheath or a scabbard.
Oh yeah, good work.
This is the precursor to me making the one for our actual bushcraft knife.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd make my son one for his Leatherman.
Yeah.
My son's brought up with knives. His first birthday present was a pen knife.
Nice one.
And he's been, using it since he was one.
Excellent.
He was driving a car by the time he was 6. On his own, not with me on his lap. I just want him to, I want him to be hands-on. And it might sound reckless to people out there, but if you go to an indigenous community, the Inuits in the north, they need to give their kids a knife to play with. It's just completely normal.
Sure.
Obviously you teach them always cut away, but all these skills are being lost on, and no disrespect, but the PlayStation generation. I remember my grandma. I was about 6 when I got my first pen knife, and she bought me one with a slightly kind of hook blade on it, and that was it. That was your weekend. You're out whittling stuff.
Yeah.
Making yourself bow and arrows.
Yeah, absolutely.
We used to rob bamboo from a neighbour's garden and make ourselves blowpipes, and we thought we were James Bond. But that's my first attempt. It's not meant to be good, Paul. Hence the zigzaggy.
Oh no, that's all right.
What it is?
It works. It's good.
What it is, I wanted to mirror this one. So this is just your typical. I got this when I was in training in the Marines. That, friends at home, that there is the strap you get when you parachute. It comes off, and you find them on the ground on the drop zone. It's it's called a tie, and in the military, if you can nab one, you use it to put on your knife. Swiss Army knife. Maybe we can talk a little bit about it, because I just absolutely love this knife, this tool. Just, they're so bloody. They last so long, and they're so precise. But anyway, I digress. So I was trying to mold the leather like that. And as you're going to, as I'm sure you well know, it's not as easy as you think. I tried doing it in hot water, and I boiled the leather, and it shrunk half the size and went rock hard. So in the end, I cheated, and I did it in strips. So I just cut out U-shaped strips. That's why the stitching's gone a bit wonky, because when I did it on the drill press, and I brought the drill down, and it was coming out the outside. Yeah, you're going. So I was like, fuck it, I'll just
quite a lot of layers there.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an art in itself, isn't it? It's every different material, is different skills. It's different knacks when you're working with different materials. And if you're a small scale maker, you're kind of obliged to do that. You got to work with different steels. You got to work with brass, bronzes, and woods and leathers as well. And they all have their own issues when it comes to going wrong. So you learn, what to avoid and how to avoid it along the way. Yeah, I mean, the leather's funny because it's actually a dead animal, isn't it? A dead animal skin. It's got quirks in it and imperfections and
different animal hide types. They act differently under the knife, or when you soak them and so on as well. Yeah.
When we talk about the swords, what's the most popular sword? What sword's most in demand to be recreated?
That's a good question. One of the swords I've made more of, perhaps, than anything else, is the He-Man Sword of Power. Yeah, the He-Man cartoon series. Right from that, I had a mate. He says, "Oh, I've been a He-Man fan for years, mate. Can you make us one?" And I thought, you know what? If something takes my fancy, and I think it's interesting enough, I'll give it a go. And I thought that's an interesting one. Yeah, give it a go. So designed it up, but with the form of it, it's quite wide and it's quite thick. If you made it in iron or steel, it would be ridiculously heavy, So did it in cast aluminium for the whole thing. And aluminium you can polish up to practically a mirror finish. So that was the right material for the job. So yeah, I made quite a few of those. But in terms of the historic swords, you see, I don't tend to make batches of swords. I'll make 1 or 2 swords at a time because there's a lot more time invested in them. But I have made quite a few. Don't know if you can see it, the basket hilt swords behind me here, very much associated with the Jacobite risings through 17th and 18th century. And because I'm Scottish based and get involved in quite a lot of research in Scottish history side, then yeah, I've made quite a number of these along the way.
I bet the Claymore's popular as well.
Yeah, I suppose over the years I've made a few of those, the big two-handed Scottish swords, fairly popular. Yeah.
Not many pubs in Scotland haven't got a Claymore on the wall.
Yeah, that's true. I see everyone likes shiny things.
Can we talk about sharpening? Because somebody I learned an awful lot about sharpening blades was Ray Mears. He used to, not a lot, but he did a few, or at least a couple of episodes on this sort of thing. So I invested in some Japanese waterstones, and they're incredible. And I got the little sort of clamp that sits on your table to stop to stop them, like your dad's whetstone when you're a kid, and it would fly away. And you get a little tiny stone, and you soak the whetstones in water overnight or whatever to get them to work, and then you get a slurry stone, don't you? And you make slurry, and that slurry is so fine that it really gets not even the final bit on the blade. The final bit on the blade, after stropping it on leather, Ray Mears runs it down the edge of the window in his vehicle. Yeah. But yeah, I bought these stones. It's easier than it looks. I remember I bought a Japanese chopping blade in the fish market in Tokyo, and the guy had a whetstone that was the size of my desk. It was incredible. And he just got my blade, said, "Do you want it sharpened?" And I said, "Yeah." And he just went, and you could see this guy just knew he'd probably done this hundreds of thousands of times. So yes, how do we deal with this?
Sharpening is absolutely its own knack, and it is something you certainly, if you're working with blades over time, you get a feel for, the right angle and the right pressure and the right grit and material to be working with. And really that's all sharpening is about. It's about finding that right angle for your edge, about realizing how blunt your knife is in the first place, how much sharpening it needs, because sometimes you just need to just subtly hone an edge and just, refine it. If it's been well used, then you're going to have to take some steps back and start with, a bigger grit, basically. Surface finishing, putting a finish on any surface of steel, and sharpening it's a similar process in a way. You got to move through the grits consistently, and you've got to be thorough at every stage. Think about the surface of a blade, because the edge, acts the same. If at any stage you're leaving, rough grit, and you go on to the next stage, well, that next stage isn't going to, you're still going to have rough scratches, if you like, in the surface. So you've got to be as thorough as you can in the first stage, then the second stage, and then the third stage, and so on, to get everything reducing evenly. And dealing with the edge is exactly the same in a way as dealing with the surface of the steel. So it's simply about, knowing how much you have to sharpen and getting the right sharpening materials for that. With a relatively blunt blade, you're not going to do too well if you just take that straight to a fine diamond surface. You're going to be there for weeks. So you've got to start with something rougher and just thoroughly work your way through. And it's getting a feel for the right angle. See, different knife types will be slightly different. You'll have more acute or more obtuse angles depending on what you're dealing with. Some blades will go from the spine all the way down to that edge, what you call it, a zero grind. So it'll just go straight to the edge. You can get an extremely sharp edge with that, but yeah, takes a bit more work to carefully hone an edge back on it. Most will have what you call a bevel edge, so it will go mostly to an edge, and then you'll get a secondary angle on that, and that's easier to maintain in a way.
Yes, because you hear talk, don't you, of the Scandinavians have their Scandinavian grind.
Yep.
Which is like the triangle. My one, I don't know what it is, Paul, because I think after I did a bit on the belt sander, which is an art in itself, and obviously when you've gone to the trouble of cutting out your blade and shaping it and everything, you just one wrong grind, it's going to screw the whole thing up. I think I got the sort of rough bevel started, but then I set up 2 electric drills with sanding pads. There's big round sanding pads, and I brought them in close, and I synchronized the speeds, so they were whizzing around at the same time. Right. And then I dragged the blade through it.
Yeah.
And I could feel it pulling the steel off. It's a real satisfying feel, and I could feel it pulling the steel off. And finally, it's got to this, because they're rubber. The pads are rubber, so they flex slightly. It's the perfect contour on each side. So there's no grind. I don't know if I'm going to find out to my cost that it won't. I mean, I haven't even sharpened it, and it's probably sharper than most knives that I've ever used. So yes, fascinating. Is that a grind? Do you happen to know? There's no. It's like literally it just tapers to a point. I was happy with it. It was just right. Okay.
Yeah, those are convex.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that'd be convex. That sounds similar to. I'll see if I can find it. Just grab one here. One of the best bushcraft knives I think's ever been designed and made. Type D survival knife.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. Well, this was originally the Wilkinson. Wilkinson only made the Type D survival knife, and this has a convex grind to it, which means that as you impact, it splits. It's great for bushcraft work, because of that grind, and it also means there's actually quite a bit of meat still on the blade. You're not intentionally reducing the weight of that blade as much as possible. You're maintaining as much weight as possible. And at the spine, these are about 7 millimeters thick. Actually quite hefty. It's almost like a hand axe, but it's short and compact, So that's kind of pretty much what you want in a bushcraft knife. Yeah, you want it to be compact. You want it to be meaty and weighty as well for doing those kind of jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. Unlike this one, I built this for show, really, not show. I just wanted every feature that I'd ever thought about in a knife in this one.
Sure.
So for a proper bushcraft, obviously you wouldn't have the serrated edge, because you want to be able to hammer down on it with a log, don't you, to use it?
Yeah.
To use it as a chisel.
So that's a great thing about a thick spine. Yeah, you can hammer on it. Yeah, for solid splitting.
That looks like what they called in the Navy a gollock. I don't know if you've heard that term.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah. There was a development of this, became known as the MOD survival knife for a while, but it was basically a much cheaper version. The fit and finish of the grips were not great. If you're using it in a tight grip for a while, it would blister up your hands in no time. And the grind in the blade wasn't as smoothly convex as this. It came to pretty much a kind of chisel grind down here. It was a kind of cheap version.
Yeah, I was on the ship for a year, and I think there was 12 of us Marines on board. And one day the buffer came up to our mess and he went, "All right, fellas, got you these knives." And he gave each and every one of us a knife just like that. Like I say, I think we called it a gollock.
Yeah.
And he said, I've only got 12 of them and I ain't giving them to my Matlows. So, yes. Paul, this has been an absolutely fascinating chat. I can put your details below and all your social media below our YouTube video so people can at least follow you, even if they can't order stuff. But
no problem.
Yeah, so if you can just send me in all your links, that would be great.
No problem, will do. What's
the future for you? Is there a retirement plan in knife making? Does it?
That laugh might tell you something. I've never had a retirement plan. I really hope and I plan to just keep cracking on because I love what I do. I really do. And I feel lucky for it. Yeah. I have very much chosen this path, because I love it. And I feel that I could be quite happy doing it for the rest of my days. And I have known knife and sword makers that have done exactly that. And they've kept working till the end. And I think that's a great thing to do.
Yes. Old knife makers never die. They only blunt their blade.
Just get sharper.
That's more polite. And one last thing, have you got a YouTube channel?
I don't, and I probably should by now.
I think you should.
I have thought about it, I have done little videos now and again for the Facebook group, and I quite enjoy doing it. So you know what, you've just given me a wee spark to. Yeah. Well,
look, I'm more than willing to help you with that. I've actually done, I think, a couple of knife videos, and I haven't tried to do them with any polish or anything. I've just put up a few photos and said, right, that's when I'm doing this bit. Little bit of video of me on the grinder or something.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things, like if you don't start, it's never going to happen.
Sure.
And once you start, then you start to learn the little bits and bobs. But they're so popular.
Yeah.
If I go back to our man here, he's getting like millions. His episode 12 of his Excelsior sword. So he did it in 12 parts. It's got 1 million views.
Wow. Right.
And it's a half-hour video. So to give you an idea, he's probably made a couple of grand on that video.
Right. Right.
And all it really means is having a GoPro set up, looking one down at your work, one looking at you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it, he just narrates over, he'll film it and he just narrates over it afterwards. And, and it's satisfying having a YouTube channel, but also I think it's great for our young people to see these skills and to realize that, if you spend 6 hours on Xbox, you literally, you might have had a bit of, you pass the day, but there's nothing, you get nothing at the end of it except a score.
Yeah.
But 6 hours in a workshop, you can come out of it with something that's, improved your skill.
Yep.
Made you happy.
Mm-hmm.
Demonstrated to the opposite sex that you know how to bloody defend yourself, right? Like you might get a few chicks there, boys.
Like you say with your lads, teaching them hands-on, that's invaluable learning, in life, and I think it can give you a taste for that as well, and it can help sort of direct your own interests in life as you go as well. Yeah.
Do you? Just to be fair, do you come across many female craftsmen?
Plenty of jewelry makers and such, but actual bladesmiths and makers, not many. There's only one I know in Scotland, and there's an exceptional scissors maker in England, Grace Horn. She's absolutely incredible, next level craftsmanship. But there's not too many out there, so that means there's only room for more.
Yes. Do you remember? Well, it probably wasn't so much the old days, but people go around in vans and they pull up in your street and you take all your scissors and knives out and they Have you come across this?
Was that
Yeah, you get
sharpening?
Yeah, you get the sharpening
Services.
person comes around like once a month, and you take all your. I mean, I've seen it. I can't even remember where I've seen it.
Right,
And it's not something that happens in my street, but
yeah, I remember seeing in Edinburgh. There used to be somebody went around Edinburgh, right enough, but I don't know if they still do. It's something I offer just as a local service, is sharpening, and I get folk bringing along, gardening tools and axes and all sorts, so you don't know what type of edge you're going to have to deal with from one day to the next. But yeah,
we didn't even talk about that. Our next project is an axe for my boy. He wants, he loves all his like Viking stuff, and how half the kids' cartoons these days are people hacking each other with it's yes. So we're gonna move on to a double-bladed axe.
Nice.
So yes, Paul, it's been incredible, mate. Like I say, I'll put your links below the video. This has been a dream come true of mine to chat to somebody of your stature in the knife making profession. So thank you ever so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for having us.
Brilliant. So, and Paul, just stay on the line while I say goodbye to everybody. Friends at home, you can follow Paul McDonald Armories on social media. I suggest you do. It's nice to have something pop up in your feed that's not a photo of someone's lunch. Yes, I'd encourage you to do that. And massive thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Bought the T-Shirt podcast.